In the early 20th century, a new form of art was born, and it has grown immensely ever since. Of course, I am talking about cartoons. They are now a huge part of creative culture, and hold a special place in the world of entertainment. From Hanna-Barbera to Warner Brothers to Disney, there are many iconic characters that are loved by millions throughout the globe. Yet there are people who look down on cartoons and see it as something that is beneath them, that it's immature and should only be for kids. This type of thinking is a stigma, and it's not too uncommon. I actually got to experience it for myself firsthand, and that inspired me to make this video. This is why cartoons aren't just for kids. Back in 2014, I was working as a sales representative for a copier company. Every Monday morning, my sales team would meet and we would talk about our weekends and the work week ahead. During one of these meetings, I mentioned to the group that I saw How to Train Your Dragon 2, and that I thought it was a great movie. One of my coworkers gave me a strange look and said, "You have no kids. Did you see that movie alone?" I told him that I saw it with a friend. He then said, "That's really weird, man. Why would you see a movie that's meant for children?" This caught me off guard. I was surprised how direct he was being with me about this subject. The conversation was eventually dropped and the meeting continued, but that exchange of opinions made me wonder, why do some people think this way? Why do some people believe that cartoons and animation are a lower form of entertainment? In order to find this answer, we need to go back and take a closer look at the history of cartoons. Like I said before, animated cartoons started to appear on the scene in the early 20th century. Some of the first ones include Mickey Mouse, Betty Boop, and Popeye. They were all black and white at the time, and would typically play before a feature presentation at the movie theater. That's why you would see gags like this.
Hey, Bud, you in the audience. Where do you think you're going?
Well, Mr. Killer, this is where I came in.
Well, you sit right back down there till this thing's over, see? You know that mug's trying to get out of the theater to squeal at the cops.
In a relatively brief amount of time, we went from this to this. That was quite impressive, considering that this was a new and challenging field of art. There was so much to discover, and many ways to put these cartoons to work, whether it be entertaining an audience or selling war bonds.
Any bonds today? Bonds of freedom, that's what I'm selling. Any bonds today?
That's right. During World War II, cartoons were being used to sway the support of the people, whether it be rallying the troops or humiliating the Axis powers. You know, for kids. That's the thing though. During this time, it was primarily adults who would view these animations. Going to the movie theater was considered a formal event and was somewhat of a special occasion. Today, we can hit up a matinee showing and gorge ourselves on a bucket of popcorn while watching the Avengers. But back then, it meant a lot more. It was the equivalent of going to a play or a musical. Times have changed though, and the beginning of that change was when cartoons arrived on television. The television started to arrive into households around the late 1940s, but they were few and far between. By the late 1950s and the early 1960s, TVs had become a lot more common, and the shows were much more diverse. Cartoons were no exception to this, and we started to see a rise of iconic characters. Scooby-Doo, the Flintstones, and the Jetsons, to name a few. When comparing cartoons from the big screen to the television, one of the largest differences was production cost and quality. This made sense though. Movies were a one-shot deal, while cartoon shows aired often and needed to be completed in a timely manner. That's why you would see backgrounds that would never change.
I don't need to walk around in circles, walk around in circles, walk around in circles.
Around the 1980s, shows such as My Little Pony, Transformers, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were popping up, and they were quite different when compared to their predecessors. Many of these shows had one goal in mind: mass-produced toys for children. Companies realized that these cartoons could become glorified commercials for their toys, and we see that trend grow in the 80s. This is when I believe the cartoon stigma was born. Adults saw these shows as childish and thought they were only meant for kids. Now, the 1990s were interesting. There were definitely shows that only cared about selling toys, but we saw the rise of television networks that were meant for children. These were more experimental and focused on entertaining their audience rather than selling toys and toys alone. Why the change of heart? Most of these networks were on cable. That is where ratings and viewership really mattered. Transformers and My Little Pony, though, were on broadcast television, so the quality of the shows did not matter as much. Yet Nick and Cartoon Network, for example, needed to make sure that their shows captivated their audience, so they could earn their viewership. Quality began to matter again, but many adults still looked upon these shows as childish and beneath them. Today, things are very different, and it's unlike anything else from before. After going through a drought from 2006 to 2010-ish, cartoons came back in a big way, and are now growing both in numbers, style, plot, and more. What happened? What brought back cartoons from the edge of extinction? I personally think it's due to the kids who grew up in the 80s and 90s. They are older now, and they are practically adults. Now they have the power to choose what they want to watch and consume. This changed the landscape of the world of entertainment. Now companies and studios want to make shows that are fun for both adults and their kids, since both demographics can enjoy the show together. I remember walking into my sister's living room and seeing my brother-in-law, who is a police officer mind you, watching My Little Pony with my 2-year-old niece. They were both intently watching the show and were really into it. I couldn't help but smile. Not because it was about Pony, but because two different generations were enjoying the same cartoon together. And quality did not have to be sacrificed in order to pander to the children's demographic. That is a huge step towards progress to me, especially for a show that's widely believed to be for little girls. I think nostalgia also plays a huge part in the return of quality cartoon shows. The people who grew up in the 80s and 90s are now grown, and they miss their childhood. Cartoon Fridays are long gone now, and Saturday morning cartoon blogs for broadcast television are now a thing of the past. This gap can now be filled by quality shows, and networks are making good on that in every shape and size. Cartoons aren't strictly for kids either. There are quite a few shows that have adults as their main demographic. The Simpsons, Family Guy, and South Park to name a few classics. And there are some new ones on the scene, such as Rick and Morty, BoJack Horseman, and Archer. The main issue with the cartoon stigma is that these shows are exceptions, while everything else is childish and bad. And that simply isn't true. Sweeping generalizations rarely are. When it comes to this stigma, I think back to a quote from C.S. Lewis. Critics who treat adult as a term of approval instead of as merely a descriptive term cannot be adult themselves. To be concerned about being grown up, to admire the grown up because it is grown up, to blush at the suspicion of being childish. These things are the marks of childhood and adolescence. And in childhood and adolescence they are, in moderation, healthy symptoms. Young things ought to want to grow. But to carry on into middle life or even into early manhood, this concern about being adult is a mark of really arrested development. When I was 10, I read fairy tales in secret and would have been ashamed if I had been found doing so. Now that I'm 50, I read them openly. When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up. The stigma of being childish has been around for a long time, and cartoons have become a victim of it. Yet today's generation is unlike any other, and it is more accepting than those before it. We are seeing a rise in geek culture in general, and that means people are more open in accepting things that might come across as nerdy or weird. Slowly but surely, progress is being made, and society is shifting in direction. Cartoons are just a small part of that picture, but play an important role nonetheless. I think we can all look back on our childhood and think of a cartoon character that left an impact on us, whether it was finding inner strength, inspiration, laughter, or just someone to relate to. Just because we have grown up doesn't mean we have to let go of things that we loved as kids. They were important to us then, and they can be just as important to us now. Quality does not have an age restriction after all. So, in conclusion, I believe that the cartoon stigma is dying off. Cartoons have changed from the 1980s, and so have people. Yes, there will be people who look down on cartoons, but there will be people who love them too. Yet the fact remains, just because something is a cartoon doesn't automatically make it childish and bad. There are many great pieces of work out there that disprove this. Cartoons are just another form of art for people to enjoy. So that's all I have to say about that. If I left something out, or if you want to contribute to the discussion, please leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.